Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. Democracy is in a very fragile position with one major political party seemingly doing everything they can to make it harder for certain groups of people to vote and stripping fundamental rights and also denying elections. But against this backdrop, journalists play an important role both in terms of how they report, but also how they communicate this to their readers, watchers, and listeners. How should journalists be talking about this moment of history? What does it mean to be objective and give both sides fair coverage at a time when one political party is so against the idea of democracy? And what is the role of a journalist today? I'm joined by the perfect person to talk about this, John Harwood, someone who I had the chance to actually meet when I was in DC over the summer. John has had such an illustrative time in journalism, holding positions at the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN, CNBC, and more. John, it's so great to see you. Thanks so much for joining.
Morning. Great to be here.
So your most recent position was for CNN, and you were covering the Biden White House. And a lot of people have thought that the media has been a bit harsh on him, especially when it comes to his age and the gaffes that he makes. And Ron Klain, who's the outgoing chief of staff, also points out the lack of coverage on major stories like the economy getting better or other pieces of legislation. You're not at CNN anymore, but I'm wondering what you make of the coverage President Biden has received from the media so far.
Well, look, I think there are a couple of elements of this. First of all, President Biden followed an incredibly disruptive, divisive, corrupt Trump administration. Yeah. And so he's naturally somebody who is going to attract less eyeballs and viewers and readers for stories about the White House. So that's one thing that the news organizations are dealing with. The second thing they're dealing with is the long-term decline in viewership and readership. The digital revolution has fully democratized the information environment so that people have innumerable sources of news. None of my kids get cable TV, for example. Yeah. And so there's a lot of competition. Third, you've got news organizations that, as they try to keep viewers and listeners, feel the need to demonstrate that they are being fair to both sides so that they can attract people across the political spectrum. That's not easy to do because people have siloed themselves in terms of where they get information. But all of that has combined, I think, to, as well as the media's natural predilection to cover conflict, has led people to harsher assessments, I think, of the Biden administration than have been justified, both in terms of its economic policy and overall its operation, legislative success, et cetera.
Right. So there's so much that you talked about that I want to get into, but I want to touch on the point that you said that there is, I'm not a traditional journalist by any means, but it seems like a lot of reporters and journalists are taught the importance of being objective and impartial and giving both sides, like you said, fair coverage. But during a time when democracy is kind of more fragile and under attack than before, do you think it's okay for journalists to be taking sides, or do you think their job is fundamentally to simply give the facts from both sides?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about taking sides on. Do we take sides between lies and truth, right? Yeah. So that's the core of journalism. So we don't, if we know something's not true, we can't portray that as on the same ground as something that is true. I don't think, or at least if you're a non-opinion journalist, which is what I have been, you don't take sides on policy disputes that are in good faith between the two parties. You don't identify as a liberal or conservative, even though it's pretty clear from the sort of facts of sociology that the kind of people who go into journalism tend to be center-left. But I do think we have to be able to call out things that we know are true, even if the burden of that criticism falls on one side. The goal, I think objectivity is a reasonable goal, but it doesn't mean treating things that are not equivalent as equivalent. And I think the ultimate goal is presenting an accurate picture of the world and doing it with fairness to all participants. And I don't think fairness, for example, to President Trump requires you to pretend that things that he's saying that aren't true are true.
So one of the things that you touched upon was this kind of siloed media environment where people who watch MSNBC and CNN don't go outside of their bubbles. People who watch Fox News don't go outside of their bubble. But I want to ask you about Fox News specifically, especially people like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, because to me, the evolution of Fox News is fascinating. Can you walk us through what the evolution is? And do you think anything will make people like Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity change, or is that kind of part of their business model to propagate basically lies to their audience?
Oh, I think it's part of the business model. Look, Fox News was started by Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes came
Yeah.
out of Republican political campaigns. He was an overtly political person. The channel has had a lot of, over the years, good journalists, people who were smart, people who operated in good faith. But over time, it has evolved as the Republican Party has evolved, as the populist base within the American political system has evolved, to simply feeding the grievances and fears and anxieties of that base in ways that often simply have no connection to reality. So they take small little blips in the political world and try to portray them as major hurricanes, and it's not accurate, and I think it's not helpful to the health of the society.
Are there no standards or policies or kind of regulations that journalists have, and people who go on air have to abide by? Because it seems like what Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity are doing and other far right media outlets is just a true threat to democracy and lies to their voters. Is there nothing that stops them from doing this?
Well, the First Amendment guarantees that the freedom of people communicating in the media is not restrained. And so,
Yeah.
no, you can't, there's no regulation you could put on anchors of television shows or the guests that they bring on. That's something that the market tends to determine. Now, you do have questions in social media about, with the, again, the digital revolution that has disseminated so much information so rapidly to so many people. Is there a responsibility for those outlets to try to distinguish between what's true and what isn't, what's incendiary and what isn't? And that's something that the private market has to do, whether it's Twitter or Facebook. I think it's not for government to prescribe.
Definitely. So as we head into 2024, I'm wondering how you think journalists should cover Trump and Republicans. In 2016, there were some major concerns about how journalists reported on air and what ultimately happened. What do you think journalists should do in 2024 and learn from based off 2016 and 2020?
Well, I think they should not shrink from talking about Donald Trump's record, the things that he's done and said, the corruption of his administration, the attempt to overturn democracy that was a prolonged effort over a number of months, culminating in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. We need to call those things out plainly rather than pretending that that was just a sort of discrete political event. Now we've got a new campaign, and what's the new Trump going to look like? We know what Trump has brought to American politics, and we have to say that without flinching.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about your most recent time at CNN. You posted this final clip following Biden's speech about the threat to democracy. And you said, I just want to quote you, it's also important to say that the core point he made in the speech about the threat to democracy is true. That's not easy for journalists to say. Tell us more about that moment and why you felt compelled to say it then on your last day at the network.
Well, that wasn't different from things that I said multiple times on the network. It just happened to be on the last day. But I think that, look, everybody in journalism does the job the best way that they see fit.
Yeah.
I've been doing this a long time. So I feel confident in the analytical judgments that I'm able to make about the state of affairs. Other people in different situations, younger people who haven't seen the things that I've seen, may come to different conclusions and do the job differently. I can only do it. I have to be true to myself in terms of describing things that I see and call it the way I see it. And that's what I was doing in that occasion. And that's what I've done previous to that, both in my time at the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, CNBC, as well as CNN.
So you mentioned young people and young journalists. I'm wondering what you would tell them about this moment and what you would tell young journalists and also aspiring journalists about their role in this moment in time.
Well, look, journalism is a tough business right now
Yeah.
because of all the forces that I mentioned, economic
Right.
forces and political forces. It's very polarizing. It's not very profitable. And if you want to go into journalism, you've got to be committed to the process of gathering facts about the world, seeing them, communicating those to your audience, and finding a niche within this information landscape where you can make an impact with what you're doing. And whether that's at a independent website or a major newspaper or magazine or television network, there are a whole lot of opportunities. The proliferation of opportunities has diminished the impact of any individual institution, and that's simply the nature of modern journalism. But there are ways that people, if they bring original, compelling, honest content to American viewers and listeners, to find an audience.
Yeah, I really hope that's the case. And for so many young journalists out there, I know, at least talking to my friends, there is this concern about this such polarized moment. And I'm just really worried that this attack from the far right on journalists and the media are pushing people away from journalism. Do you find that's the case too?
Well, I think all of the things, all of the developments in our politics and the difficulties in our politics have pushed people away from politics. On the other
Yeah.
hand, it's incumbent on journalists to describe accurately when things are going well. So when you
Right.
have, for
Right.
example, an economy that's been extremely resilient after the COVID disruption and continues to be adding jobs, yes, inflation is a problem, but that doesn't obscure the formidable accomplishments of the recovery in
Yeah.
putting people back to work. And there are good things that are happening in democracy. In the midterm elections just a few months ago, many of the people who'd been peddling lies about the 2020 election lost their elections. And
Yeah.
guess what
Yeah.
happened? They conceded.
Right.
So that was a good thing for American democracy. And you also had people vote, both voters and candidates ultimately recognizing that some of the things that happened in 2020 and January 6th of 2021 simply went too far and were offensive to the core ideas of America. And that's
Yeah.
a positive sign.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. Call things out like they are. One final question for you. You had such an amazing time in journalism. What are your next steps if you have any?
Well, I am doing a lot of speaking.
Mhm.
I am pursuing some teaching opportunities, and I'm not done with media.
Yeah.
I'll be back in some form at some point. I'm taking a little break in that now.
Definitely well deserved, and hopefully keep us informed on your next steps. It's going to be such an amazing time watching you in your next steps, and you're such an important voice during this time when journalism, democracy is under attack. So thank you so much for all that you do and joining me this morning.
Thanks, Victor.
Thanks so much. That was a great episode with John Harwood. He is someone who really represents the best of journalism, I think, during this moment. Like he said, call things out like they are. Don't be afraid to call out what Republicans are doing, and also maybe even what Democrats are doing, but just not shying away from both the facts and also calling things out like they appear. A couple of things for this morning before the weekend begins. First is yesterday, there was some breaking news regarding Ilhan Omar. Republicans have spent these past few weeks trying to oust Ilhan Omar from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And Ilhan Omar kept on saying she would push back. Democrats would say that they don't support the measure. Yesterday, every single Republican voted to oust Ilhan Omar from her committee on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And it's just a real, I think, indication of two things. First, I think there's this political vengeance that Republicans feel. This is in line with what happened to Eric Swalwell, as well as Adam Schiff, where they kicked both of them off of their committees as well. They view them as a threat. They view them as people who simply, raise facts, who will call them out for what they do. And then there's also this element of, I think, racism and sexism involved. Ilhan Omar, as a Muslim American, as someone who is a woman, I think has to go through this every day far too often. And Republicans, one, it's political vengeance, but it's also, I think, motivated by her race and her status as a woman, not being afraid to call out men, a lot of the white men on the Republican side, for what they're doing. And so yesterday, we saw that, and immediately after, I thought this was a bit of an epic move from Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries said that he would immediately move to place Ilhan Omar on the House Budget Committee, which is another powerful, powerful committee. So if Republicans think they can silence Ilhan Omar, they don't know what they're coming up against. And Hakeem Jeffries has proven that he is really committed to appointing a slate of Democrats who aren't afraid to call out Republicans. So we'll be watching what happens with Ilhan Omar in the next couple of weeks, what happens with Democrats, and some further committee assignments. Committees are already underway. We saw Marjorie Taylor Greene questioning witnesses about critical race theory, which was totally absurd. We're seeing Republicans wear AR-15 pins to committees. And it's just this yet another indication that Republicans really don't care, I think, about the functioning of government. And that puts all of us in harm's way. The next thing is something that we saw this morning right before I went on air, and that is some amazing, amazing economic news out of the new January jobs report. 517,000 new jobs were created. And get this, that's 330,000 more than the Dow Jones expected. 330,000 more. So more than 500,000 jobs were created in the month of January. That now makes, as you remember, maybe a few weeks ago when we covered the December jobs report, which was the lowest in 50 years. This now brings the unemployment rate to 3.4%, which is the lowest in 54 years. So it's more proof that the economy is strong under President Biden's leadership. And I think it's hard to, contrast this. I think it's easy to contrast this compared to, what's happening in the Republican side, when their economic plan would literally raise inflation, raise costs on American families, increase taxes by 30%, gut Social Security, gut Medicare. It's just such a difference between what Republicans and Democrats are doing. And I think there should be an indication to all of us that this is what happens when you elect Democrats. Democrats get things done. Democrats deliver. And these job numbers are, I think, yet another indication of that. So some great news heading into the weekend. Democrats, I think, should be really proud of this. If Republicans got these numbers, they would be saying this every single moment they can. So I hope Democrats will go on every platform they can, really promote these numbers, give the American people this sense that Democrats deliver, because that is absolutely true. Next week, we'll be back with more episodes of On the Move every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon. You don't want to miss that. We have some great guests lined up for you. And we'll also be doing some more Ask Me Anything. So if you have any questions, please be sure to leave them in the comment section or tweet them. My DMs are open. Be sure to ask me some questions and we get to them next week. We hope you enjoyed this episode of On the Move, and I will see you all next week. Have a great rest of your weekend.